Alright guys, 3 2 from the Storyline Project here, and today we're gonna look at how we're gonna look at just what's going on when we color grade some 4K raw footage from the cinema camera. Cinema camera? No, from the Blackmagic production camera. So let's do that. It's the boarding, so let's go for this one first. Let's see. We got this shot. Alright. Seems alright. Let's just take it at this point here. Here we go. Let's go to our color palette. Oh no, I don't have a timeline yet. Let's just drag it into the timeline. So now we have our footage here. Alright, so the first thing that goes on, it's not fully 4K. It's actually larger than 4K, so now it's being cropped down into the timeline because it's not exactly 16 by 9. But you can fix that later on as long as you have all your data in the screen right now. So, let's see. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our camera raw settings. And we're going to look at that. We're going to go for decode quality of full resolution. So now we're getting the full 4K resolution so we can check out all the details. You could actually just, if your screen is not 4K, then you'd probably go like maybe half res would be fine, because your screen wouldn't be able to show you that anyways. Then we are going to choose the decode using Cinema DNG default. Will make everything in default and leave this as flat usually, or you're going to use the camera metadata, which is how you shot it during the day. In this case, this is how I shot it during the day. Or you could go per project, so the entire project is going to have the same decode settings, or per clip, which means you can use different decode settings for each clip. So let's go for a clip now, because then we have more options here. So the white balance, if it's as shot, it's going to be this blue kind of thing, because that's how I shot it on the day of. I knew I would be able to change it. That's what RAW gives you. So I didn't do anything to it. But if you want to change it, you could go daylight. Now it's a bit better because it was kind of daylight, but it was cloudy too, so you could go white balance cloudy, which looks like this, which is more representative of the real world. Or you could go custom. There's other settings you could try. I usually go custom, so then I can go for my color temperature here, which is in kelvins, just like a photographic camera. And if I bring it down to 2000, then you get this. If I bring it up to 11,000, then you get this. I actually just want to keep it at maybe 45. That was during the day, it was probably 4500. So let's bring it at maybe 6,000. Go a bit more. Oh, almost had it. There you go. 6,000 for me is fine. You get that almost greenish tint that you might be able to see. That's just how the camera, that's just the color technology behind the camera, and it gives you that, but it's still very, very filmic. You could go for a color space that is Rec 709, which is TV, or just basically any kind of standard color representation. P3, I've never actually used it, so I wouldn't want to speculate on that. But BMD film is going to be the flattest. It's going to be almost like an S-Log footage, but made by Blackmagic Design. So this is what it looks like. There's a big difference between BMD films and Rec 709. BMD films actually gives you a higher dynamic range because you have all that information that you can work with. If you don't have time for that, then obviously just go Rec 709 and just do some standard, very, very, very light color grading and export that. But if you do have time for more extensive color grading, then you definitely go with BMD films, because then you'll have all that information that you can use. ISO, once again, these are the 3 ISOs that the camera gave you. Like, it's not a limitation of the software. It's just that's how the camera is. So we're gonna stay at 400 because I'm assuming ISO 400 is like the base ISO, so it's the ISO where you're gonna get the most data possible. At 800, you might get higher exposure, but you're also going to exchange that for noise, which is not what I want. Highlight recovery is only in spots where, if you look at Rec 709, we're not really clipping. If we were clipping, like this was like pure white in the background, then you would go for highlight recovery, which would try to bring back some highlight that you've lost, which is really difficult to lose highlight when you're shooting raw. But if you do lose highlights when you're shooting raw, that means you're shooting really high exposure, and you might like highlight recovery might help you out. So you can save it for this version. I'm basically gonna do it separately for every single clip, so I don't need to save anything. The color match is if you have to match two different shots. So now let's begin. We got our first node, so I'll show you guys what the nodes are. This guy here, now that's our first node. I don't usually use parallel nodes. I usually just use serial nodes because that's just the way. I'm not like a professional colorist, so here we go. First, what we're going to do is we are going to open up our scopes. So show our scopes here. I only do it for one scope, but let's go for a histogram. No, that's not what I wanted. Parade. No, that's up. Waveform, vector scope. Oh yeah, it was parade. Alright, so I was right. Let's go for parade. Look at how everything is balanced out. So red, white, and blue, we seem to be having like kind of decent leveling here. If not, let's just look at what we've got here. Let's just take a look at a few things. Oh, what's this? Alright, that's what I needed. Alright, so basically we could spin this wheel to bring our highlights up. Alright, to gain up. But doing that is going to lift everything, which means our saturation, if you look at the vector scope, it's starting to show some saturation here, which is because we brought up these guys. If you bring it down, you can see that it becomes smaller. Bring it up, it becomes higher. That means the saturation is increasing as well. Now, usually you don't want to change the saturation when you're working on just the luminance. So there's a luminance. Davinci has a luminance control here, which you can use. So let's do that. Let's bring our highlights to a point where it's okay. I'm gonna bring it to 896, which is usually just my benchmark. Now, as you can see, if you're looking at it, blue and green kind of are similar, while red is still lacking a bit. So let's bring red up a bit. Let's just bring individual color channels up. Now, these seem okay. If you're looking at the midtones, red again is still lacking in the midtones, so let's bring that up. Here, maybe red is going up a bit more, but it doesn't seem to be doing too much of an effect right now. Now, our footage here is still kind of flat, not too much contrast. So let's take our lift. Again, luminous control because we don't want to affect the saturation just yet. Let's just bring it down to a point where it's almost clipping, but not that much. So at least we have some black clipping. Some people actually like it when it's not clipping. I just prefer it full saturation. Full contrast. Now your gamma here, what I do is the luminance control for the gamma is going to be for controlling your level of contrast. If I bring it down, then there's going to be a bit more contrast, and as you can see, it's really like I'm bringing down my midtones, and my midtones are becoming more dark, which means that this guy's face is becoming darker. If I bring it up, then our contrast almost disappears, but everything kind of fits into more of a highlight space. So you have to gauge it, like how much you want it. I usually just go for about a bit lower than what it usually is. So this looks fine by me, because I know that it was pretty much a dark day, and if you want to change this, then you probably could, like, it's pretty dark. Maybe bring it up a bit to 1, and that would be fine. If you want to change contrast in a more understandable way, then you can just go for this and bring up your contrast that way. As you can see, it's actually, if you look at your parade, what contrast does is it's stretching everything up. So basically, it's just the difference between your gain and your lift. So if you want to change your contrast, use your gain and your lift, and then pivot, which is this, is just how the midtones are placed between those two, lift and gain. So you could actually do it here with the controls, or you could do it with the contrast and pivot controls, which I don't prefer because it's simple, it's fast, but these offer a lot more control and it shows you a bit more of where everything is. So this is how we got, this is what we get so far. It's still not saturated that much. It's very flat in a way. As it has that small red and green tint, but you want it to have full color. So let's move out of here for a second. Let's go and add a new serial node, which is nodes, add serial node, Alt S. I don't click Alt S just to show you guys where it is. Alright, there you go. Node number 2 is selected. Let's go back to our screen here. And let's look at how we're going to bring up the saturation. You could go and use this, bring up your saturation to a point where it's noticeable. I usually don't do that. So let's bring it back to 50. Let's see how we're going to do this. I'm going to go to here, which is your RGB mixer. Alright, for this one, we are using the RGB mixer. And what we're going to do is we are going to look at... Oh no, I closed my scope! No! Alright, we're going to look at our vector scope here. And look at what happens if I'm pushing the reds up. It's going to go for the reds. So it's much more red than anything else. If you want it to be saturated, you might have to go from red to C, which is probably something else, which I forgot. You could go yellow to blue, stuff like that. What is this? Damn it, I forgot. Alright, let's bring up our green output. Now it's shifting to yellow because we have red and green. Then we push our blue output, it's going to shift back to the middle. Let's bring our green output from the red output. That's kind of weird to say, but let's just look at it that way and bring it down. Oh, what is this color? Oh, cyan. Cyan! Oh, okay. Let's bring our blue down now. That's even more. Like you can see, like our black bars are kind of going crazy. If they're true black, then it's not going to matter in the end. But let's just look at this. Bring it down. Bring all of those guys down. Okay. Now, if we look back at our stuff here, if we turn down this node, then you can see the saturation has pumped up gradually, like very dramatically. Usually you wouldn't want to do it that much, but for me right now it seems to look quite alright. Like you could probably use that. If you don't like this, then if obviously it's too much, you could go to your key. Now your qualifier key is pretty much what is being affected, what is the node affecting in your image. Basically, it's affecting everything. Everything is white, so the entire screen is being affected by our RGB mixer. So all you need to do is look at your key output. You could use your key input. I don't use input. I'll just go for output because that's just a general thing. Let's go for key output and bring our gain down, which if you look at this, the white screen, if I bring it down, you're going to see that it's getting darker and darker, which means that less of the image is being affected by the RGB mixer, which is this is just a dial to show you what happens with the RGB mixer. If I bring it up to like 2, then the RGB mixer is going to affect this by 2. Now let's bring it down to maybe 0.5, and you're going to start seeing a bit of the saturation going away. It's very subtle because we are using a raw file, which means it's very flat, and any change is very gradual. So maybe just leave it at 8. You could also leave it at 1. It looked nice at 1, so that's fine. Now let's start. That was just a bit of color correction in the beginning of how we were correcting the luminance levels and the contrast. And once you want to start styling, which is almost what we're doing right now, is we're adding a lot of saturation like this, and then we're going to start just stylizing to the way that we want to stylize. In this case, I don't really feel like there's any need to stylize anything. because it's just a random statue, and it looks fine, it looks nice. I could maybe bring a new node and push the gains a bit into the orange, see what happens. Push the blues into the, push the lifts into the blues, and that would be okay for me. No problem. Maybe go back to our saturation dial and bring our gain back to maybe 5.8. So that's it. That's pretty much how you do it. Let's go for a second one just to see. Let's go for another file here. For one with human beings inside. Now these have snow in them, which means it's going to be very, very difficult to gauge whether you want to expose for the face or expose for the subjects or for the ice or the snow. I'm just going to take this shot of Yasin here. He's just being casual. Let's bring it down to our library here. And let's drag it into our timeline. Bam. Now Davinci Resolves, this is what, 12, 13, 12. Man. Okay, so the new Davinci Resolve actually has a lot of editorial features. So if I want to start focusing on the Yasin at some point, maybe just bring that back. This is very reminiscent of Premiere. So let's just bring it here and have that. Do this. Here we go. Alright. So now that's what happens. Let's just go for Yasin's face here. Let's look at a few things. How we're going to decode this footage. Same thing, I'm going to go full res on this just to get as much information as I want. Let's go for a clip. My white balance is going to go as shot. Probably not. I'm probably going to go for a custom and bring that Kelvin up. Bring the Kelvin up because I want to make sure that I get those skin tones going on. Now obviously we're still in Rec 709, but that's nice to know that your color temperature is based on Rec 709. So then you could focus on those skin tones a lot more. If you're not in Rec 709, it's just going to be flat, and it's just going to be flat and gray. You're not going to be able to gauge what the skin tones are. Exposure as well. I could actually push up that exposure or use the ISO. ISO is less precise, but in either case, pushing up or pushing down the exposure might reduce the quality or add some grain. Like negative gain is also detrimental to the picture quality. So let's go for BMD film here. As you can see, you can't really gauge the skin tones from BMD films, but you do get a lot more detail. If you look at the behind Yasin here, Rec 709, you can actually you're actually losing a lot of detail from the shadows, like a bit under his in a few dark parts of his under his backpack and stuff like that, on his coat, and in the tree here. And if you bring it back to BMD films, you get all that detail. It's a bit small, so if you want to see it, like you get all that detail. It's there, and you can use it. And then let's go for ISO 800. No, just kidding. ISO 400. Highlight recovery. I'm not, look, as you can see, nothing is clipping. If you look at your parade, you're far from clipping, so that's fine. No highlight recovery. No need. So let's go for, once again, this thing. So same thing. If you want to affect your saturation, do it, but I usually separate my nodes in terms of what I want to change. If I want to change the colors, if I want to change the saturation, if I want to change the contrast, or any of that stuff. So always, my first thing that I'm going to do is bring my highlights or my gains to around 896. As you can see, they seem very equal, so we did a good job here. Obviously, if you look at the midtones, which is the gamma, which is referred as gamma here, red in the midtones is a bit higher. Now you don't have to specifically level everything. In this case, I'm not that concerned about the midtones being that way because blue is farthest away from the skin tones. Green as well is pretty far from the skin tones, but skin tones do have a bit of green, so that's fine if it's in the middle. And red is very reminiscent of skin tones, so that's fine. Like if when we're gonna bring up the saturation, you're gonna be able to see that differentiation, mostly because here the bricks are orange, red, so you're getting a lot of that red here. So that's what you're seeing here. It's not because you shouldn't have to equalize everything to the T because your image itself has many colors inside. And here we go. For here we have again our lift. Bring it down. Now if you bring it too down, then of course you're losing footage. You're losing a lot of information here. But let's take a look at one thing. Now your parades show that all that information below 0 is lost. Usually in an application like After Effects, or except if you use After Effects in 32 floating point, then you're fine. But if you're using it at 16-bit or stuff like that, then when this happens, if you go for an extra node here and you end up bringing it up, you're gonna lose everything else. You're not gonna be able to recuperate that data, But if you're using 32-bit like Davinci is using, then that information is never lost. Even though you're clipping it in your latest node, you're not losing it in the next one. And in other applications, you do lose it. So it's important to use a good color corrector or color grading software, because in that case, you have less problems with that. And you get to use all that information that's usually being clipped after an operation. But if you're using, in this case, any operation can kind of like counterbalance itself. So right now we're back to the point where these here are most likely a bit of what's in the tree, a bit of what's in the back, like the creases here, and a bit of what's going on with Yasin's shirt. Now it's kind of difficult to differentiate my bad, the grain from the snow. If we play it back, you can actually see we do have a bit of grain here. So let's bring it down. Let's crush those grains. Log actually gives you a lot of grain sometimes, and it's normal because what you should probably do when you're shooting log or when you're shooting blackmagic log, pretty much blackmagic film, BMD film. You should probably overexpose a bit, because as you can see, like in the beginning, our highlights were pretty much at this point at about under 512, which was okay, but that means that you have that much more that you could have taken out by overexposing. Don't use your ISO to overexpose, obviously, because you're just adding noise, but definitely just overexpose using your iris, because Blackmagic Films is going to bring it back. Is going to record all that information, even though it looks clipped. If you're looking at it in Rec 709, it's gonna look clipped. But when you bring it back in BMD Film, you're gonna see that that information is not lost. It's not been clipped. It's all been recorded into the sensor. That's important because when you're overexposing that way, you have a lot more leeway to crush your noise and therefore make for a cleaner image. In this case, I didn't do it. I was just exposing, looking at my Rec 709, which was acceptable, but I could definitely overexpose it and still get all that data. So here you go. We have our kind of levels all set. I could maybe bring this level down just to focus on. This is the outside, which is just really. This is what you're getting on this side. It's pretty much your image. Here is Yasin. You can see the skin tones. That's why it's red here. And then probably a bit of the brick. And then on this side, on the far left, is just light. It's just white and trees. So that's what you're seeing here on the parade, is just this white thing. So everything is equal here, and that's why most of your highlights are there. It's fine because it's kind of leveraging from highlight to dark. I could actually bring that one down to make it really, really dramatic. But in this case, let's just leave it at about -3. Let's go for a second node here. New node. Let's go back to our colors. Now let's have some fun with our saturation here. You could do your saturation at any point you like, but if you're planning on doing a lot of color grading, then probably go for saturation right now and just do a minimal color saturation, because right now it's really, really flat, and any kind of change that you're going to do is going to be enhanced by the saturation. Any kind of change in a color spectrum. But so you wanna at least push up that saturation so you can see the effects that you're doing and kind of gauge how much you want of each. So let's one more thing. Let's break up our reds. Let's go for a vector scope here. So here we're pushing to reds, pushing to blue, going for reds. Oh, this is not red. No, pushing for greens, bringing down blue, pushing blue. This is another way to increase your saturation. It's a lot better. As you can see here, it's very, very, very saturated, and it's it's not very acceptable. So now that's when your key comes into play. You can bring your gain down and start gauging how much saturation you want. I'm actually good with this. It might be a lot for you guys. On my screen, it looks alright. I think even though I calibrate screens sometimes, it just doesn't look the same. But as long as you gauge it on your own, like I'm looking here and it doesn't look too crazy. Bring it up a bit. And there you go. So that's the amount of saturation that you're going to add in this point. It's a lot more red, as you can see. It's pushing to red and almost orange. That's fine. That's because of the bricks, because of the skin tones, because of here, maybe a bit of red here. See, as long as you can look at your scopes and just gauge what's going on. Like here, you can see it's pushing more for the reds, obviously because of the bricks. Blue is more on the dark side because you're having blue here, and obviously then you get your highlights over there. So as long as you can look at your histogram and just gauge a bit of what every part of the image means, then you're fine. This is a waveform, which is pretty much your parade mixed up together. As you can see your lights here, a bit of how everything's going down. Alright, parade, you're good. Here, we're good. Let's see what's going on here. Let's see what's gonna happen. Now we've set everything up for a color grading level. So let's go for a new node. I don't need to go back to my node graph. I know that I'm adding a new node, so I'm selecting a new node here. I'm maybe gonna go for a key corrector here. So let's go for where is it now? Oh, there it is. Go for a qualifier here. Qualifier actually just selects a part of the image. So when I'm selecting this, you can see down here that I'm just selecting the light in the background and nothing else on the right. Everything on the left that's being really, really bright, I'm actually wanting to bring that down for a second. So I could do that and just reduce the attention to this, because it's at a point where it's too bright, you're actually kind of forced to look at the left side of the frame, which is not what I want that much. So let's bring it down to about this point here. So now the more illuminated side of the screen is probably Yasin. I might want to have to select Yasin on another node and check that out. But in this case, well, I feel like we're doing alright. Maybe bring a bit of blue, and that's good. Let's go for another node here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to concentrate on Yasin's face and try to figure out what colors I want. So I could probably go for a curves editor, which is pretty much looking at the curves and figuring out what we want. Go for reds and then bring up our reds. This is very basic, by the way. Maybe not. As you can see, your whites here are being changed by the reds, so maybe not do that. Maybe look at different ways to do it. Let's just go for a qualifier again and select once again our highlights here. Let's go for a key, see what's happening. See what's happening with the key here. Let's go for a qualifier. Alright, so I'm still selecting everything on the left. What I'm going to do now is that's pretty much what I don't want to grade. So let's look at our key, let's invert it. Alright, so doing what I did is I just pushed on the invert for the qualifier. So now what I'm qualifying is now the inverse of what I chose, so anything in the background is not going to change. I'm kind of worried that the black bars here are going to be affected by it, but it doesn't really matter. Like, it's black, so probably it won't be, but if it is, then it's going to be cropped out no matter what in the end. You're not going to leave in your black bars. That's just redundant, and that's just using extra pixels. So we have our new node, which we qualified already. Let's turn off our qualifier here so I don't accidentally choose anything else. Let's go for our curves again. And now if you're looking at your curves, then you can probably look at what's going on here. Let's go for usual qualifier. Is when you're qualifying, you're just changing everything except the background. The snow, of course, is still being changed, but not to a degree where it's noticeable. I'm just wanting to push the skin tones because it is cold, so Yasin is probably red. You can feel that in the here in the ears. So that's what I'm seeing right now. Now let's see something. Let's look at a few things here. Let's go for. Let's go back to. Now, once you start doing those adjustment, you can go back to your key, go back to the saturation levels, and just bring those down if you need to. If you feel that it's a bit too much, you can definitely go down with that. So I'm bringing that down, going back to my fourth node here. And everything's being changed. So let's see. Let's see where we are at now. We could probably go for another adjustment in our serial node. This is more of a stylish kind of thing, but I enjoy doing it that way. Going for my highlight, my midtones, and my shadows. You could also, if you're used to it, you could also go for gain, gamma, lift, which is pretty much the same thing. Offset being the entire footage. My gains, I like to bring a bit of almost yellow orange to it, and then it depends on where your darks are. Usually they're not in the gamma, but I usually just push a bit of the gamma, and then for the lift, that's the rest. And that would give it that flat, almost filmic look, but that's just a style that people use. I usually just go down for maybe blue or green kind of tint. Just a bit. It's just very, very minimal stuff. So here you go. If you look at what it was before, or that adjustment, it's just adding a bit of color to everything. So on my side, it looks fine. I think at this point it's completely acceptable to like export this and just do whatever. You could actually go even further and maybe go for another node. Like I said, I don't use parallel nodes, so that's pretty much all we get. Is we get these guys. Just to get a line. Every time you look at my nodes, it's just lines. Now let's look at what we're going to do here. We're going to go for a power window. Now power windows are limited when you're using a free version of Davinci Resolve, but if you're not, then you can use as much as you want. I don't often use it, but I like it when it's up to subjects because it's more appealing when you're trying to single out a subject. Now, I know that Yasin is not moving that much. I just know that I'm going to be moving a bit. So maybe I just keep it up with him here. Right, first thing I'm doing is I'm not adjusting to what it's going to be in the actual footage in the end, but I'm just adjusting it to his face because I know that this is what I want to follow. So now I'm gonna go to my tracker here. This is kind of new for me here. Let's go back to where it was. This point here, that's where he was. See, as it moves a bit, so I actually just want to start tracking here. Then we have our tracker. Let's see a bit where Yasin is going. So at least he's not moving that much. I'm moving just a bit. Yasin is not. So as long as my tracker doesn't go crazy, you're fine. And Davinci does have one of the best trackers out there. So now we have our tracker. We have Yasin's kind of weird face right now. Let's go back to where it was. And let's change the size of that tracker here. Alright. Let's change it. See what's going on. Let's go up here and check a bit on what. Alright. As you can see, I just want to have a bit of attention towards Yasin. So I'm gonna, if you're looking at this here, this is kind of like what's going on. The fading. And I actually want to darken this part even more. And in the back here, it's fine. Like, Yasin does have a strong contrast. His face does have a strong contrast with that background. So I don't need to affect it too much. That's why it's in the range of that Bezier that I'm doing right now. Is it Bezier? That vignette. Now, what we can do here is we could actually go for luminance in the curves. What curves do is they'll never actually clip your footage completely. It basically compresses whatever's in your parade or your scope or anything, whatever values, it actually compresses from one way to the other. So that's what we're doing here. As you can see, if I'm bringing everything up to the max, you're gonna see what the vignette is doing. Is it's affecting what's inside, but not what's outside of the vignette. Now that's not what I want, particularly in this case. I'm gonna go back to my power windows mode. I'm going to invert. I think that's the invert. Let's see if it is. Let's go back to our curves here. Bring it up. Yes. As you can see now, everything outside the vignette is being affected, which is what I want. I'm not going to bring it up though. I'm going to bring it down subtly. A good vignette is a vignette that you do not spot. So let's bring it subtly. Now, if you had to bring it down even more, then you probably, now this is just disgusting and unattractive, and this is what you want to say. This beautiful face. But no. Let's bring it back up here. Let's make it less noticeable. Here. In this case, probably less noticeable. So there you go. Maybe you could add a bit of contrast in there at some point. You could add contrast in the end as well. There's no full set of rules for this, you know. At this point, we are color grading. We started by doing some lights and just like some very subtle color correction, which gradually changes to color grading, because that's just how it is. Now let's go for, if you want to affect everything, again, when you're affecting every single channel like I'm doing right now, you're gonna affect your saturation, like so. This, you can see it's very much more saturated now, which is not what I want. So let's take everything and reset it. All right, let's take our luminance now and just do a very basic S curve. Now an S curve is this. Usually the S curve does meet at the middle of the graph. Some people don't like it. I usually just use it as like a pinning point, but you don't need to. At this point, if I look at my parade here, my darks are getting crushed a bit more. They're getting compressed, and I kind of want to keep that high dynamic range look. And in the end, color grading is just about how you feel and how things look to you. In this case, that's just how I did it. And that's it. That's pretty much it. So thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope you learned a bit of how to use Davinci Resolve when color grading, color correcting raw footage. Obviously, when you're using maybe H.264 footage from your DSLR, if you're using AVC HD footage from any other camera, or XAVC footage, which that's pretty good from your A7S or A7R or A7. Pretty much any Sony camera that has XAVC, That's really nice. Obviously, it depends on the bit rate, and bit rates are really important. Now, if you're using lower bit rate footage, this one is, I think it's like 14-bit, not sure. But if you're using lower bit rate footage, obviously you're going to have a bit more trouble color grading at this level, doing some, because these adjustments, even though they're small, it's really easy to do and it works like butter. But when you're using compressed footage, it breaks really fast. So you have to be careful. And obviously, this I haven't been working with raw footage that long. I usually work with. I've been able to shoot raw footage for a long time. I've been shooting a lot more H.264 or XAVC footage, and in this case, it's a lot more difficult to do. And if you don't want to have to do all this work just to get to a point where you're satisfied, then you could probably go into, let's see what we've got here. You could select maybe a new node. Let's just move these up a bit. All right, let's turn off these guys. All right, and we have BMD again. Let's bring a new node here. Oh shit, that's bad. Let's go back to this one. Ugh. All right, here we go. Let's go for a new node here. This program's going crazy. Okay, and you can actually just right click on this and look at your lookup tables. Lookup tables in this case are pretty much almost presets of colors that you could use, that you could create even and use. In this case, I could go for film looks and choose these guys. Maybe let's choose Blackmagic Cinema to Rec 709, Blackmagic Production Camera, which is our guy, film to Rec 709 V2. In this case, it just turns it directly into Rec 709, which you could do down here, but if you want to be able to turn it on and off, then that's the one that you want. And then you can start grading from that point, and that's a good starting point. It's obviously just a starting point, and you could do better on your own, but it's there. It's there if you need it. You could actually just go ahead and, instead of selecting these guys, just go for film looks and choose the level of film that you want. You have a lot of different presets, and obviously you can check this one out. You know, it looks okay. It's very, very dark, very filmic. Then maybe here you go. I have another node before it, which can be adjusted. You don't usually adjust LUTs by using a node that's after the LUT node. Don't do that, because the LUT is like almost like a final thing, and it's doing a lot of operations. And if you actually try to modify something after these operations, then you're most likely breaking your image. So in this case, we have our film look here, but I think it's a bit too dark in this side, and it's getting a bit too contrasty. So maybe you go to my curves here and bring it back up a bit, and bring up the darks, the lows a bit more. And that's before the LUT is being applied. So as you can see, that's what it looks like. And see, here are highlights. We could actually adjust this, but I just want to show you that you can actually put a LUT, the 3D LUT. If you're using the BMD film LUTs, then again, always do something after the before the LUT. So that's my adjustment before the LUT. If I didn't have the LUT, this is what it would look like. It's ridiculous. You would never grade like that. But if you do have the LUT set on already, then you know that this is going to be your final product. So when you're adjusting according to the LUT. So that's my last tip on this case. And yeah, so use LUTs if you like using LUTs, I guess. It looks nice. I prefer going from scratch because it's just how I do it. It's just my preference, and I feel so much better after when you're done. If you made some good color grading and you started it from scratch, and you have all that pride, you could actually download LUTs and add them onto Davinci Resolve. That's also cool. But yeah, so if you don't like to go from scratch, use LUTs, and always correct before the LUT. But obviously you can have the LUT on, so then you can see what your correction is doing to the LUT. Or go from scratch, This was for blackmagic DNG raw files. So there you go, guys. Okay, I was Chu from the Storyline Project. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.